I'm Aryeh, and welcome to the Winsidr show where it's all about the W. Today, we're talking the Lynx versus the Storm in the WNBA playoffs, round one. If you like our show, please consider joining our Patreon community. For less than a cup of coffee a month, you can directly show support for the hard work we do covering the W. I'm here with Neil Olstad, podcaster and writer who covers the Lynx for SB Nation at canishoopus.com, also known as the one, the only, the great Lynx Dynasty podcast. All right, Neil, so let's talk about this matchup, the Minnesota Lynx taking on the Seattle Storm in Seattle. I know that there was a lot of talk about this being a game that could be swayed by home court advantage. Give me your initial thoughts. I know we've known that this was the matchup for, I want to say, almost 2 weeks now. But when we realized that this was the matchup and it's in Seattle, what was your initial reaction?
Yeah, I think that last game, the deciding game on the last day of the season against LA, that kind of was, to me, in a lot of ways, we're going to maybe determine the outcome of this Lynx Storm game because they're so well matched, and there's a lot. I think it's going to be a very interesting game, but ultimately, home court advantage, could be the thing that gives it to the Storm, and I think that's probably going to be the case. I guess we'll do official predictions and get more into that here as we go. But yeah, I mean, both of these teams obviously have great home court advantages, great fans that come out in droves no matter what, and are just so loud. And there's the whole Everett thing, with that's kind of the one sort of maybe home court advantage sort of situation that might throw a wrench into that, is that I believe this game's being played at Everett, which I think is where the team started their season, right? The first half of their season was played there. So I could see that maybe being a thing that maybe upends that for Seattle, but yeah, I got to give Seattle the upper hand in this game, and it is close. So yeah, maybe home court advantage is the thing that pushes it over the edge.
Honestly, I was kind of shocked to see ESPN predict Minnesota to win. And maybe that's, I say this all the time. I grew up in Minnesota. So maybe that's the Minnesota sports fan in me being like, anytime ESPN picks any Minnesota sports team to do good, i.e. Minnesota Vikings last year or anything else, they just do horrible. How much stock do you put in ESPN dooming the Minnesota Lynx?
Wow. So yeah, now they're coming for the Lynx, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if it's a matter of they've been so successful over the whole bunch of years, so they're just like, well, that's obviously the team that we. I don't know. I don't want to pretend like ESPN doesn't really know what they're talking about here. I guess it's their games and stuff like that they're putting up on the TV, but. Yeah, I don't know why that would be the case. I mean, the one thing I guess Minnesota really has going for them is that they've won 5 of 6 at the end of the season. So I don't know. That's maybe the one thing that I could see maybe is tilting the odds a little bit in that way. Is maybe Minnesota's improved play, I guess, of in the last few weeks of the season. But other than that, I don't really know.
Let's talk about key defenders for this game. I know you weren't able to be on the conference call with Reeve, Sill, and Fee today. One of the things that Reeve talked about, which is really interesting, because if you were to watch the Minnesota Lynx take on the Seattle Storm this season, they played 4 games. Minnesota won the first one, and then Seattle just bludgeoned them the next 3. You definitely wouldn't know that Seattle has struggled to score the ball this season. And like I said, Reeve talked about it. She said that they were well above their season average field goal percentage, and they need to bring them down below their season average. Their season average is 42. Reeve put the winning formula number at below 40. Let's talk real quick. When you think about this matchup, who are the key defenders on Minnesota's side in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everything starts with Sill. I mean, we start there because she takes care of things in the paint, and that's usually a given. But I think beyond that, as far as controlling the paint, is going to be Dantas, and that's kind of another interesting. I think Dantas is an interesting swing piece here. She didn't play in 2 of the games. I believe just 2 of the games in this series. this season, and missed time here and there, and was bothered with the calf injury on and off throughout the season and stuff. So, if you get a great effort on the defensive end from Sil and Demiris, and what they can do, kind of switching off, maybe on taking turns on Natasha Howard and that kind of thing, then I think that is another way that Minnesota has a chance here. I mean, just they have to play the perfect defensive game kind of here, and not that Seattle has an incredible offense like you were saying, but that's really how Minnesota's going to win this game. How the Lynx win games all season was just ripping teams up on the defensive end and going from there. And so I think interior is kind of where I see that starting from.
That's interesting. I do want to point out, I ran the numbers. You're correct, but with an asterisk. She played in 3 of the games, but really she only played in 2 of the games because the 82-74 Seattle win, Dantas played 14 minutes, went 0 for 1, 3 rebounds, 2 assists, and 0 points. It was essentially she didn't play.
It might have been one of the games where she was just like coming back from the injury, maybe, and they were just played her a little bit or something like that. But sorry about that.
No. Hey, I was giving you a hard time, but also giving her a hard time. For me, I view it the other way. I mean, I have nightmares of those 3 victories that Seattle had, of just it raining from deep. I mean, the 3 points that they were dropping. I mean, I realized that one game they're taking 23-point shots, another game they're taking 20, another game they're taking 17, or 13. It seemed like it was just this flurry of deep shots that kind of doomed Minnesota. And we're going to get to offense in a few, but flipping it, when you're for me, I'm looking at perimeter defense is going to be key for Minnesota. I need to find a way where we can, or they can, shut down that deep ball, because I mean, if Kayla gets going, or Sammy gets going, or even Courtney Paris can get it going from deep, I mean, that's really, really scary.
Yeah, and that is something that I think it starts in the paint, but make no mistake, Minnesota has to do it on both of these areas, and that's something that I'm worried about too, and it's something that I was there, the game that I believe the 3rd game they played, the game on July 17th, that was at Target Center. I was there. Sammy Whitcomb, I believe it was a career high. She shot 5 of 11 from 3, or maybe I think it was a career high in something that night, it was an assist or something like that. But she just had a great night. She was the best player on the floor that night. It was just the Lynx could not defend her. I remember after the game, Cheryl Reeve talking about how Lynx players were simply not going over screens. They were going under screens on her, despite the, the scouting report and stuff like that. Just, I couldn't believe it. And you're right. There's lots of nights where, again, in this matchup, in this regular season series between Minnesota and Seattle, where Seattle just lit it up from 3. And Minnesota struggled to defend the 3-point line all season long. It wasn't just Seattle who lit them up there. There was a lot of nights where it was kind of a lot of just head-scratching games where there was just wide open threes being taken against the Lynx. I don't know what it is, because you look at Odyssey Sims and Danielle Robinson, and you have 2 above average defenders right there, you would think, but there were just some ways, I guess, that other teams were able to pick apart that that perimeter defense and be able to find open threes. And Minnesota cannot allow Seattle to make 12 threes, make 10 threes. I mean, that's just unacceptable, and it will doom them right away if they let that happen here in this playoff game.
Yeah, they can't do it. It will be a nail in the coffin, or I'm sure Sylvia could think of some better mortician pun. Let's move on and flip the script. Talk to me briefly on Seattle's side. Who do you think is going to be a key element to stop Minnesota's offense?
Well, I mean, everything about stopping Minnesota's offense is about clogging the paint. It's about bringing doubles on Sil. Having a good and a primary defender on Sylvia is also important to kind of deny catches in certain areas and try and front in certain situations and stuff like that. But I mean, that Seattle has to be focused on sending help to Sylvia whenever she touches the ball. Whether that comes from Natasha, depending on how those matchups go. If Mercedes starts to, guard her first and then they go to Natasha, or whoever it is, for me, I don't know if it's one person. It's kind of more of an idea of, watch the tape on how teams did it all season against Sylvia, flooding the paint and, daring Minnesota's, subpar long-range shooters to shoot the ball and stuff like that. So, that's what it comes down to for me is just limiting Sylvia as much as you can, because that is kind of the one way Minnesota's offense can get going. If they can't get stops and get into transition, they really need Sylvia to shine and stuff like that. And it all starts from the paint. And obviously that can mean Sylvia, either getting buckets for herself or opening up, threes for other people or closeouts for Collier or stuff like that. So, for me, when I think about what Seattle needs to do to win this game, it's just kind of what a lot of teams did this season really well against Minnesota, which is, deny ball to Syl.
Yeah, and I mean, I've talked about this endless times on my podcast. I'm sure you've talked about this endless times on your podcast. Really, this whole season makes you appreciate the Lynx Dynasty. Little plug there. So much because
thanks.
Right. It really does, because we're sitting there and I don't want to take away from what Syl has accomplished in her career in Minnesota, but you start to sit there and wonder throughout the season a little bit and go, was it that she was playing so amazing, or was it that Simone knew exactly where to put the ball? Lindsay knew exactly where to put the ball, and she's paired. I mean, obviously Maya knew, but then she's paired with Brunson down low that, really causes mismatches. Or was it that she was that dominating? And I don't want to say that it was that she wasn't, like, that it was the supporting cast, but like, this season makes you think that, right?
Well, and I think that what you're talking about is sort of the difference between just an all-star player, quote unquote, just an all-star player, and the MVP of the whole league. I feel like that is sort of the difference that you get there by having that continuity and that familiarity with those other players. Like you said, I mean, I know your love for Simone runs strong, and man, when she didn't have a great end to this season, but when she was out there, you did see some of those entry passes and some of that just know-how with Syl, and it was like, oh yeah, like that is there, and that is like a real connection they have. And like you're saying, that was true with Whalen and Brunson and all those players as well. So yeah, it's not a huge factor, but it is a factor, and I think it is something that can take a good team to great or a great team to a champion. And it's definitely, probably something in the Lynx that need to keep growing with. They need to keep building that. And, maybe they didn't have that at all times this season. So Sylvia's still great. She's still an all-star player, but she's not in the MVP discussion, So I think it's kind of one of those things where it can kind of bump you up a level.
No, I agree with that. That's some good insight there. I appreciate that. Let's talk about offense. Key offensive players for the Seattle Storm. We'll start with Seattle. We'll do Lynx secondary. For me, this might sound a little weird, because to me, I'm just like, yeah, Natasha Howard, she's going to eat. She's going to get hers. To me, the key players are going to be Sammy Whitcomb and Jewell Loyd. If Sammy, because like we talked about, Minnesota has tremendous issues with digging themselves out of, 3-ball holes. And Jewell Loyd is a player that I think if Seattle overall wants a successful playoff run, a lot's going to ride on her, because Natasha Howard can do a lot, but you need that secondary option. You need that third option to really step up when we're in the playoffs. Who are you looking at in Seattle as far as offense?
Yeah, I'm looking at the outside shooters. I'm thinking about, obviously Sammy Whitcomb, but yeah, also, Alicia Clark, people maybe, yeah, like some like players who you might think, or Kalina Mosqueda-Lewis coming off the bench hitting threes. That's something that happened in one of these games this season against Seattle and Minnesota. So, those role players kind of stepping in, maybe off the bench and hitting threes, I think that's going to be big for Seattle. And that's something that I worry about Minnesota being able to, hang with offensively, to be able to roll with, having their bench be able to score like maybe Seattle's bench can potentially score in this game. So, yeah, mostly I'm thinking about, like you said, Natasha's going to eat. She's going to get hers. She was great in all of these games, I think most of these games. But, for Jewell Loyd, I didn't, she kind of came in and out of there. She was less consistent against the Lynx. So I don't remember, her really, going on a crazy run on her own or really contributing like many of the other players on her team did against the Lynx anyway this season. So yeah, for them to get a big performance from Jewell, whether it be from three or her ability to get into the paint, that'd be great. But yeah, I'm worried about the 3-ball first and foremost from Seattle. So can Alicia, Clark, knock down 3 or 4 or something like that? That would be huge for Seattle. Or again, maybe someone off the bench like Kalina or I don't know, like you said, Courtney Paris. Who knows?
It's ridiculous. I remember when Seattle was in DC, and they got There was it was a crazy game. It was like a really close game, and then they just blew them out late in the game. And it seemed like they got a little barking at from the coach. But speaking to Mercedes Russell after the game, I was like, "You're the only person on this roster who's not a 3 threat. Like, when is that going to change? What are you going to do?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, I've been working on that. Ha ha ha." But it's not a joke. Like literally, she's the only person on that roster that I don't leave open for 3.
Yeah. Wow.
It's scary, man. Let's talk about the Minnesota Lynx, though. I got my number one player, and I know you're gonna have a few others. My number one key offensive player for this, Lexi Brown.
Yeah, I hear you. That's most Lynx fans believe Lexi Brown has not played enough minutes this season at all, and that's they need all the shooting they can get, and she's one of the league's best. So I agree with you there.
Who else are you looking at? I mean, obviously we talked on Dantas a little bit. Sill's gonna get hers. Who are some other key players that might not be the biggest names out there, or might not be the right home to mom because so and so scoring like crazy this season, but could be key in this matchup?
Well, as far as someone like sort of maybe that's not one of the key players that they need to score. I mean, the Lynx will take anybody off their bench scoring at this point. They've had a couple of tough games where they haven't had a lot of scoring off the bench, except for maybe late maybe in the game or something like that for the garbage time. But like you said, Lexi coming off the bench and hitting a bunch of shots early would be enormous. That's for sure a good one. Steph Talbot has not played. She strangely didn't play the first half of the game against LA on Sunday. It was a weird lineup. I don't know if she was ill or something like that. She played a little bit in the second half. And then beyond that, it'd be great if, Temi could come in the game and hit some shots. She's shown that she can hit the mid-range shot a little bit and, stretch things out, especially if Sill, unfortunately Sill will get a couple, maybe 3 fouls early on in the game. That'd be awful. That'd be really bad for Minnesota in this game. But, Temi's been all right coming in, and especially on the offensive end, holding things down. But then as far as the big names, I think Odyssey Sims is somebody who, when the Lynx need a big win, sometimes she puts the team on her back this season and has been able to, albeit at volume, she can shoot her team into some victories here. If she can, mix it up, get into the paint, get to the free throw line, especially. I mean, the Lynx need Odyssey Sims to shoot 6-7 free throws in this game at least, please. I mean, it is a lot, but that is something they need her to do. And so, I think Sims needs to do her thing in this game, and she at least needs to, really try to get in the paint and get fouled because, offensive creation from the perimeter has been something the team has lacked this year. But Sims is someone who can give them that. So maybe they can get that here in this game against Seattle.
Hopefully. I mean, I'm keeping my eye on Fee. I want to see, can she for Sims and Fee, I both look at is can they kind of cement that next level of folklore to the fans, to their legacy, because Fee's come in here. There's some debate. I feel like we're both on the same page as far as who wins Rookie of the Year. I'm just gonna put this out there. I will be so pissed as someone who thinks you have to be honest and critical. I will be so pissed if the W decides to give a joint Rookie of the League thing, because honestly, I think this whole debate thing and the friendships that have been destroyed, the families that have been destroyed based off of this debate is amazing for the league's growth. And I think you would be doing a disservice to the fans and to this growth if you gave a joint award. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a really good. That's a really good point. But I kind of talked about that possibility like midway through the season or something of like, oh, it was really neck and neck, and it felt like, oh, and I haven't seen the WNBA do that. And I was just thinking back to like Grant Hill and Jason Kidd having that in the NBA, like when I was growing up. I was like, oh, co-rookie of the year. What if they did that? But as the season's gone on, especially here in this last 3 weeks or so, I mean, Fee to me has pushed forward. I obviously have watched every minute of Collier this season, and much less of Ogunbowale. So I'm biased as far as that goes for sure. But as far as looking at the stats and following the trends as they go along this season, I think Collier separated herself in the last few weeks. But yeah, I think you're right. I never thought about that though. That's cool. It's like a debate that you can live on for years and years. If they give it to co-rookie of the year, well, we'll never really know. We won't have a fun debate. But if they give it to one of them, then it'll be something that kind of follows them as like a fun rivalry that they can, and something the fans can talk about and stuff like that. So I like that. But what, as far as this game in the FISA goes, what do you think they'll do with her? Do you think it's possible they might put her on Howard for moments? I mean, Natasha ate her alive in a couple games, or at least a couple stretches of some of these games in this season. But I'm wondering if, like, what you think that they might do there as far as the matchup defensively with Collier, because, man, those long arms, she can get it done, but obviously against an all-star like Howard, that might be tough.
It's a tough task. Honestly, I'll be real. The thing that's impressed me the most about Fee, besides demeanor or anything, has been her defense, has been her ability, to cover people who have size on her and have length on her. But when it comes to it's and like, honestly, it's more than that. And this is something that I think, this is gonna sound weird because it's not really what we're talking about, but like when Shepherd went down, this really caused an issue in my mind for the team, more so because you had Fee and Shepherd who are coming from that winner's mentality in college, and that I'm going to hustle my expletive off back and forth the whole time. I'm going to work. I mean, breakaways that, Odyssey Sims has or Lexi has, the person right behind them is Fee. When the other team has a breakaway and breaks down and has an easy layup, the first Minnesota player you see always, by the time the ball drops from the hoop, Fee's over there catching the ball. And that type of mindset and that type of energy and that we need to win and we need to do this, that's that mindset that I feel really gives her that edge on defense. I remember last year I was talking to somebody about what makes Elena Beard so good. And a former WNBA coach came out and basically said, look, there's a lot of elements that go into it, but the number one thing is hustle. The number one thing is just never giving up and effort. And Fee has that. And that's why I can't count her out. My problem is when you get in the paint, I think you have to use the sill on Howard, but you don't want to pull sill out of the paint to cover Howard, who is a extreme 3-point threat. So for me, I'm like, this is right here why Reeve is getting paid the big bucks, because this is a headache. I mean, this is, you wake up in a hot sweat in the middle of the night and you go, are you willing to give up a little bit of outside shooting because that can kind of stretch the ball, or do you want to, like, you have to basically pick your poison, don't you?
Yeah, and I think Dantas is a decent matchup on Howard. Her ability to kind of scramble, and close out while kind of still containing, that Natasha Howard threat from three. I like her there, being able to kind of guard inside and outside on Howard. I like her kind of starting there, maybe start Sylvia on Mercedes Russell and, just kind of use her in help situations. And I don't know, but obviously, like we keep saying, Howard's going to get her. She's going to find a way to score, but kind of maybe an opportunity to switch up looks on her and just make it tough. And maybe you can have her score, 17 points instead of 23 or something like that. But, that's obviously, again, that's why Cheryl gets to make these decisions. I'm sure she got something up her sleeve.
But honestly, like, hearing you talk about Dantas reminds me, like, the element that she brings to this team is huge, just in the regard of, like, all right, look at the double matchup. So you got, let's say it's Sil and Dantas that are standing out there, and then Mercedes and Howard. So obviously you're going to want to pull Howard to go out in the paint and try and disrupt Dantas from three, because Dantas is a 3-point threat. That means Sil needs to get hers against Mercedes. And I don't remember which game specifically it was, but there was one game where I just remember yelling at the TV, like, this is why Mercedes should be most improved, because she's going up against the best true big in arguably WNBA history, but definitely right now. And she's holding her own. This isn't a matchup that I still think is a advantage Minnesota, and they need to take full advantage of it if they want to get the victory.
Yeah, and you said it. I mean, Mercedes done a decent job against Phil, even a good job against Phil in a lot of these games. And I think just her sheer size, like, is really something that can stand up to Sil. But Fowles needs to make sure that this isn't one of those games where that happens. That can happen throughout the regular season a couple times. That's one thing. But this is a single elimination playoff game, and she needs to understand that, she's the Olympian on the floor here, and, she needs to take care of Mercedes Russell and make sure that, Russell isn't someone that can stop her in this game. Now, if she's getting doubled and stuff like that, and other people are coming in and disrupting her, sure, that's another thing, and you need to kick it out and make other decisions. But one-on-one, Fowles needs to make sure that she cannot be guarded by Mercedes Russell one-on-one in this game.
Oh, 100% agree. She needs to cement that, like you said, that was regular season. We're in playoffs. We're in the big leagues now.
Yep.
All right. Well, moving forward, you teased this in the beginning of the episode, so I'm going to put you on spot. I'll go first just because 2 weeks ago I said this openly, publicly on a podcast and tweeted it out, so I can't back away from this, that I will be picking whichever team has home court advantage. So I'm sorry. My stepdad's not going to let me come home any next time that I come home because I'm picking against the Lynx. But I'm picking Seattle to win 84-83.
Wow, 1 point game, just a nail biter, just amazing all timer though, right? It's just going to be one of the best. It's going to be one of the best WNBA playoff games we've ever seen.
I honestly think so. I think the Mercury Sky game is going to be ridiculous and high scoring and not exactly the greatest battle, but this is going to be not the greatest, but this is going to be reminiscent in a very different way, but of the Connecticut versus Seattle-esque series, or not Connecticut, the Mercury Seattle series from last year, or the Mercury Connecticut games from the past 2 years. But I do see this coming down to a last second shot, and I think Natasha Howard hits it.
Wow, I think what we know for sure about this game is it's going to be a slugfest. I listened to your podcast a few weeks ago. I forget who your guest was. You were talking about the middle four teams, and you were talking sort of about these matchups, and I think your guest referred to it as a rock fight, and that is going to be what this is. I mean, and it's kind of going to come down to who can. Yeah, I think you're right that it's going to be close. It's going to be grimy. I don't know that this will be a beautiful basketball game to watch. We're talking about the two bottom teams in turnovers, in turnover percentage this season. So these are teams that are just very good at giving the ball away. And, and the reason why I'm picking the Storm in this game, it goes into that home court advantage. It's these turnovers. I mean, turnovers and sort of the runs that teams can go on. That is heavily influenced, I believe, by home court advantage. You know what I mean? Like when that crowd gets going and it's a playoff game and you're getting steals and layups and stuff like that, like that gets to be an exponential problem. And I'm worried about the Lynx turning the ball over in this game. So I think Seattle will be slightly less bad at turning the ball over potentially in this one. That will help them win the game. But also, I think another thing that's big in this game is which team can get to the free throw line. Again, we're talking about the 10th and 11th place teams in free throw attempts this season. So, I think if Odyssey can go off and, like I said, get into the free throw line a little bit, or Sill, and on Seattle side, same thing. If Howard can get fouled a lot, or I'm not sure what guards of theirs can get to the free throw line, if that's Jewel or Canada or something like that, I feel like that can be a backbreaker as well. That can be something that pushes one team over the edge just barely. But yeah, I don't know. I don't have a score in mind, but yeah, I'll say Storm win by 5 or 6 or something like that in a very, very close game.
I appreciate that. Neil, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you on social, where they can find your WNBA thoughts?
Absolutely. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Lynx_Dynasty. And that's the name of my podcast that I make about the Minnesota Lynx. It's kind of 2 shows in one. I make like a narrative documentary type show a couple times throughout the WNBA season. And then this year, I've also started a conversation show, kind of that just like updates about the Lynx as the season goes on. It's called the Los Lynx Talk Show, and you can get both of those things in the same podcast feed. So yeah, you can subscribe to that wherever you find your podcasts, in your favorite app or an Apple Podcast or whatever it is. We know you love podcasts. You listen to the Winsidr show right here. So it's all love. I just love WNBA, and I love the quickly growing podcast community around WNBA. So. It's great to meet Aryeh at All-Star and hang out and chat it up a little bit and have drinks and do our thing. So it was cool to connect.
It really was, man. I mean, I know I've been listening to your podcast for a long time, and you have the smoothest podcast voice that I always dream to attain. I'm never gonna get, but big fan of the work you've been doing. I know I preach to anybody to listen to it, and I know a lot of Minnesota Timberwolves fans that I'm friends with from growing up and whatnot have for whatever reason, peeked over, seen your podcast, listened to it, and become a little bit of more Lynx fans thanks to you. So continue the good fight.
Oh, that's perfect. That's for sure the number one like thing I think about as far as like growing the WNBA. I feel like there's so many NBA fans who don't give the WNBA a try, and they really need to. So I feel like that is sort of like just basketball nerds who basically only follow the NBA. I feel like that should be like a target of the WNBA, like very specifically. But that's cool to hear that it works, you know?
Hey man, you're doing it good. So as we always end every show, we believe the players of the W and its community deserve the same in-depth analysis and respect that men's sports receive on a daily basis. Please consider joining our Patreon community to help support us in the hard work that we do. Thank you for joining us, Neil, and have a great night.
Thanks, Aryeh.